Fraudsters know the likelihood of a bank making an outbound call is higher during this period of time. Customers are thinking this is just a normal behavior. But when they ask for things like those security codes that you're not supposed to share, they share them unwittingly.
Hi, I'm Daragh McMeel.
Hi, I'm Dustin Eaton.
I'm Brie Valesky, and welcome to Good Question, a podcast for fraud fighters and risk leaders about LLMs, AI agents, and ChatGPT prompts from your friends at Inscribe. Today's topic is especially important as we approach the holidays and prepare for the new year, fraud season, and a new year. How should we prepare? We'll discuss seasonal fraud trends to watch, preventing holiday scams, and navigating the regulatory landscape in 2025. Joining us today is Dustin Eaton, a financial crimes expert at Seis with extensive experience in fraud prevention, AML, compliance, and risk management. And Dustin recently published an article titled Holiday Scams to Watch Out For in 2024. We'll include the link in the show notes to that article. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
And we're also joined by Daragh McMeel, our risk operations manager at Inscribe. Daragh, you've been on the podcast before. You partner with our customers to combat fraud and optimize risk operations. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me again.
You are welcome. Let's jump right in. So we are in the most wonderful time of the year, a holiday season in North America. And we know that the holidays are a time for family, delicious food, and fraudsters. That's right. Studies show that fraud does spike during the holiday season as fraudsters exploit, increased spending, stretched resources. There's a couple of really good data points to reference. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center reported that during the 2022 holiday shopping season, nearly 12,000 victims experienced losses exceeding $73 million due to non-payment and non-delivery. Additionally, a 2023 AARP Fraud Watch report highlighted that 80% of U.S. consumers encountered some form of fraud during the year, with a significant uptick during the holiday shopping period. And then finally, even TransUnion has analysis that revealed that during the 2022 holiday season, the average number of suspected digital fraud attempts on any given day between Thanksgiving and Cyber Monday was 82% higher globally than during the rest of the year. So, Dustin, you're an experienced fraud professional. What are you thinking about around the holidays? What kind of scams should businesses and consumers be on the lookout for this holiday season? And what are some of the pieces of advice you'd give?
Yeah, I would definitely say that ATO scams are a concern for me, which is that account takeover scams. Fraudsters know that consumers are very busy. They have an excess of transactions during this period of time. The likelihood of a bank making an outbound call is higher during this period of time. So, customers are thinking this is just a normal behavior. I'm getting a call. But when they ask for things like those security codes that you're not supposed to share, and they share them just unwittingly, they just provide that direct access to the fraudsters to access their account. So, for me, it's getting the word out to your consumers using social media, using articles, using your respective websites or email campaigns to really let your customers know when we reach out, this is something we don't do, but be on the lookout in case someone reaches out to you that just doesn't feel right. Fraudsters also are taking into consideration that consumers are very busy, right? So you get those calls. I admit I've been a victim of one of these before. I was in meetings, jumping from call to call. I get this call and, I unwittingly don't pay attention to what they're asking and provide that information, and then have to deal with those ramifications afterwards. So just being on the lookout for that, making sure that you're always taking a minute to sit back and go like, is this what I'm supposed to be expecting or supposed to be doing in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. All of us can be victim to scams based on the right circumstances, especially during the holiday season when we're all so busy. Our thoughts are elsewhere. We internally do a lot of phishing training. And the other day I fell for one of the emails because I was excited about what was in the email. It was actually something that's similar to like a regular occurrence that we have. We were coming back from Thanksgiving and I just clicked on it. I'm like, okay, great. And then I got caught in a training program that's like, oops, you clicked on a potentially phishing email. So we're all susceptible. No one's not a potential target. So keeping that in mind as we go into the holiday season. Daragh, from your work at Inscribe, what trends are you seeing around document fraud and scams during the holidays? Or what prevention measures would you recommend?
Yeah, in terms of preventative measures at an organizational level, just like you touched on there, Brie, I'd say phishing education is very important. That's phishing with a PH, not just obviously on the fraud team, but everyone in the company. We usually do this at Inscribe quite regularly, obviously, as you touched on, Brie. It does tend to add a hint of skepticism to very basic interactions and communications that you might receive. But it is a very good learning tool to know how to spot bad actors and how they might try to get through to some of the preventative measures. In relation to what I have been seeing previously through document fraud, specifically around the holiday season, I would say I'd be mindful of an increase in first-party fraud. I think that typically tends to rise during the holiday season due to more individuals facing financial pressure. You might see very high spikes in spending, obviously, and the surge in transactions in general, which Dustin touched on earlier as well. It does tend to make fraud harder to detect. So common examples might include chargeback fraud, where individuals might falsely dispute transactions, obviously. There tends to be holiday promos, so they can be exploited quite easily. Misuse of buy now, pay later services. And you might also see prevalence of loan stacking too, where an individual tries to gain as much financial credit as possible within a short amount of time. So yeah, not to be too pessimistic about it all, but within that then you could see an increase in false hardship claims too, as a result of some of this potential overspending. So I think beyond first-party fraud as well, the busy season as well tends to provide significant cover for synthetic ID fraud too, and social engineering attacks that we've kind of briefly touched on as well here too. So in terms of preventative measures, I would say to combat this, you could use strengthened ID verifications, whether that's like behavioral biometrics or increased MFA authentication. You could leverage AI and fraud detection tools such as Inscribe. Shameless plug. We could tighten eligibility criteria so that's actually like a more credit risk side. So you refine and enforce some of your rules and checks on repayment capacity and usage patterns. And then lastly, collaborating with industry networks is always a good indicator in terms of helping prevent fraud. So sharing intelligence and trends across industry groups and other lenders helps to detect and block kind of repeat offenders.
Nice. Those are some great prevention measures that I know a lot of our customers are also thinking about right now. And funny that you mentioned with the phishing education, Daragh, that it makes you a little more skeptical. We've also seen that internally at Inscribe. We do a lot of phishing education just to keep our company, our team members, our data safe. But then that has also made us more skeptical, or we'll share emails in Slack and be like, is this legitimate? And we have had some false positives where we've thought it was a phishing email, but actually wasn't. But better to be safe than sorry. The holidays are a perfect opportunity for fraudsters, but with the right preparation, we can turn the tables. We're going to talk about more actionable steps that both fraud fighters and everyday consumers can take during the holiday season. But first, we need to bring in our sort of fourth brain here, which is ChatGPT. So I'm going to jump right in with ChatGPT and say, what are the most common holiday scams businesses should be prepared for? Daragh, do you want to take the lead on reading out some of the responses here?
So first answer we have from ChatGPT is related to fake invoices and payment fraud. So this is where fraudsters send fake invoices that appear legitimate. The second one we have is gift card fraud. Fraudsters purchasing high-value gift cards using stolen credit cards. This is a super common one. We have, again, what we've already touched on is phishing and social engineering attacks. Account takeover, again, so these are all ones that we come across frequently in the industry for sure. Chargeback fraud, which I mentioned earlier as well. So making previous purchases that an individual might claim are illegitimate. And we have a few more then coming through: shipping fraud, holiday sale frauds, fake charities and such. So there is quite a few variations in terms of the most common frauds here, but it goes to show that it's very hard to prevent all of these, and it can be a bit of a tricky situation to get a hold of it as well at the same time.
Yeah, fake charities. Wow. I never would have thought about that. That's something to really keep an eye out for. Dustin, what sticks out to you among the responses here? Anything that is surprising or anything that you would say is more prevalent or less prevalent?
Yeah, I would just say a couple things. When it comes to the fake invoices, one thing to highlight that this is both external and internal, right? I think Macy's is a perfect example of the recent issue that they had where someone was involved in kind of fudging invoices, if you will. So not just a small amount, but $154 million worth. So I would definitely say invoices, are a factor to consider, especially during the holidays. Again, there's usually increased spending, both on the business side or the consumer side. So the opportunity is ripe for them to just exploit that. Gift card fraud, definitely something that I've talked about in the past before. This continues to be a problem, a challenge, especially with more vulnerable populations where they're being exploited and utilized to make these purchases. And then before they know it, these gift cards are effectively drained of any value. And then there's this worthless piece of plastic in their hands. So those are kind of some things I would definitely think about during the holidays. You kind of were surprised by the charity scams. This is just an unfortunate part of the holidays, right? Where people are looking to tug on those heartstrings. Someone's making a donation, either they're going door to door or making phone calls or other means to try to exploit someone's holiday giving in a way that's just unfortunate during these times.
Just a bit on what Dustin touched on there in terms of the charities one specifically. There's tends to be a theme here as well in terms of aiming certain fraud against the most vulnerable. And in certain cases, that's people who are willing to donate to charities out of the goodness of their heart, or just people who are a bit more or less tech savvy, I should say. There's always a theme in terms of who is at high risk here in terms of falling for certain elements of fraud and fraudsters and how they operate. So on some of the gift card ones, there's some great videos online of scammers being scammed on YouTube and stuff. I'm not sure if we've come across this, but someone portraying to be a vulnerable person and is actually just turning the table on someone who's trying to commit fraud on the phone. So they're always a win for the little guy. But there tends to be a theme here in terms of some of the most vulnerable people in our society are usually the ones that get the brunt of this, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. And the holidays are already, it's a fairly emotional time of year. And a number of these do touch on like things that would be sort of more emotional, like a holiday sale where you want to take advantage of the savings, or to the point that you both made, fake charities where you do feel empathetic and you want to make a donation during this time of year. I'm one of those people. So I think that's why the fake charities stuck out to me. My recommendation too is to always look up Charity Watch and see if you can find the charity on there. It gives you all the information you need to know about them to make sure that your donations are going to a worthy cause. Well, let's see what ChatGPT knows or thinks it knows about how businesses and consumers should prepare for the holiday season. Dustin, are you interested in taking a crack at reading some of the answers here?
Yeah, I can read these.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so ChatGPT is saying how businesses can prepare includes strengthening fraud detection systems, also enhancing employee training, securing customer accounts, verifying vendors and partners, strengthening return and chargeback policies, enhancing cybersecurity protocols, communicate with customers, and lastly, monitor gift card transactions.
Let's start with this section and then we can move on to the consumer section. I feel like there's a lot, it's almost everything we've already covered here, which is great. Anything we'd add or anything else we'd note about this? Or is it just like, nope, it's what we've said already?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate to what we've spoken before. I would say to the second point of employee training, a bit like Dustin's point earlier on the Macy's example that's just recently hit the news. It kind of auditing in terms of internal mechanisms too is still training can be very important, obviously, but to actually see the behavior of certain individuals if they're in a position of power for certain elements is a very good barometer in terms of monitoring. And yeah, I think strengthening fraud detection systems, the first one there is always a good bet. It does pay dividends in terms of the long run when you can automate a lot of this and prevent bad actors from even getting through a foot in the door from day one.
Yeah, I was just going to add, as it relates to that training, is it going beyond just the training of the front line is just making sure that a company has a culture of compliance, right? That they value the importance of raising your hand when you see something, say something is really, really critical. The other thing I was going to say as it relates to, verifying your vendors and partners is being able to just take the time on maybe not an established cadence, but just at a random period where you're looking at the vendors that you're doing business with. And, it has something changed. Did an address change, a routing number, account number? Did they add something to the title of the name that makes it look very similar, but maybe it's not? Little things like this are really critical. And just having those controls in place and that framework for controls is really critical. Because I think, you got to ask the question of like how something like, the story of Macy's goes on for so long. It's, undoubtedly they probably have millions of dollars in invoices, but not having the right controls in place can let fraud just continue to go on unchecked for an unfortunate period of time.
All right. So let's look at the consumer preparation tips. Dustin, you want to take the lead on reading these too?
Yeah. So according to ChatGPT, be wary of phishing. Monitor financial accounts, use secure payment methods, shop on trusted websites, strengthen password security, enable multi-factor authentication, be cautious with personal information, verify charities before donating, stay informed, and use identity protection services.
Okay, Dustin, what are your thoughts about these tips? Feels solid, but anything you'd add?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would just say is around just monitoring your financial accounts. Let's be honest, we probably stack our days to a point where we have very little time to look at boring statements, especially if you're using a card or an account on a regular basis, to just be able to look to that. I look forward to the day where banks utilize AI to be able to just call out indiscrepancies for us, like make my life easier. It would be great. Hint to all AI engineers out there. This would be a fascinating benefit to consumers. Because the reality of it is that fraudsters know, again, that consumers are so busy. They know this is why we go through fast food when we know it's not healthy. This is why we decide to sleep in when we know we should probably be at the gym, right? Like these are just easier ways. And so not looking or auditing your bank statements or credit card statements during the holiday season is probably more common than it is a regular behavior of a consumer. So I would just, take the time when you have time and make the time if needed to just look through things. Make sure that everything looks kosher, right? You weren't double charged, or you weren't a victim of enumeration fraud where they just got a couple dollars here or there. All those things are items that you just want to just double check and make sure everything is right.
Couldn't agree more. I've got so many thoughts, but Daragh, I want to hear yours first.
Some great points there from Dustin. Just because I've heard so many stories from both people I know and just through online forums and stuff, there's two that stick out to me. Is the fourth point here is shop on trusted websites. So obviously there's a lot of advertisements that you're going to come across over the holiday period that will seemingly have offers too good to turn down. They can be slight discrepancies in URLs or the website that you're actually taken to. So it is very important to actually use trusted sites, as ChatGPT says here, because it's a very, very easy way to get caught out, because websites by their very nature now are, even fake websites are so legitimate looking, it's almost hard to tell. The main point, though, that stuck out to me was the third point, using a secure payment method. So, yeah, absolutely. If you have the ability to pay using a credit card, it is a safer option. A lot of more modern banking and modern fintechs now that offer payment services through cards actually offer one-off cards that can be used literally just once. That's a very safe method in terms of preventing your actual debit card, for example, being stuck on a site that you don't want it to be, or getting in the hands of a bad actor. So if the bank or payment card that you happen to use does offer literal one-off card payments, those are also a pretty good option in terms of at least you know that that's the only payment that's going to come out of the account. So those two really stick out to me in terms of ones to be mindful of over the holiday period for sure.
And I was just going to call out one other thing. Like the websites can look just so good.
Oh, totally.
Unbelievably, yes. They look and feel, they keep a lot of the same information that's on the existing website. They often target like high-end brands. I happen to have seen one where I saw a sale on shoes, or type of running shoes that are not necessarily cheap. And I was like, there's no way these prices, right? Like, how could this be possible? And the website looked and feel the same. I got as far as like entering my customer information, right, to make the charge. And there was, some indiscrepancies I noted at that point, but otherwise they just look and feel the same.
You might also come across certain similar sites where once you do go to checkout, you realize the payment methods that they offer are very niche or very unique. I've come across some that are only looking to accept cryptocurrency or PayPal only and stuff like that. So if there's no traditional means of payment either in terms of credit or debit card, immediate red flag for in almost all cases as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it looks like a well-known brand, just like look at the URL, make sure it's got that secured link, HTTPS, as well as just like, is it the same URL as the brand's normal website? Go to the normal website and see, Google the website, go there and see if you find the same deal. If it's too good to be true, unfortunately, it probably is not true. And the only other one I'd highlight here, I know everyone harps on it so much and people are probably tired of hearing it, but password security. I mean, this is so critical. Our IT mastermind here at Inscribe just wrote an article about how apparently a ton of people have the name Conor McGregor as a password, and it's really common for people to use celebrity names as passwords. It's not very secure. You really want to have long passwords that are unique for each site you're using. I know it's impossible to manage, but password managers, we use them at Inscribe. I use them in my personal life. It's not that expensive. I mean, the cost of keeping your data and your financials safe it's hard to put a price tag on that. So a lot of good recommendations in here. Okay. Last question that I want to ask ChatGPT is, thinking ahead to next year, I wonder if it has any thoughts. It's weird to say that ChatGPT has thoughts about staying ahead of regulatory changes in 2025. This is a topic that we've heard from just a lot of our customers and we've been talking a lot about in the industry. So I'm curious to see what ChatGPT comes up with. I can take the lead on reading its responses and then I'll hand it over to the both of you. So to proactively manage upcoming changes in 2025, ChatGPT is recommending to establish a regulatory monitoring system so that you can make sure you're seeing all the updates from industry publications and government websites, subscribing to newsletters. It's also, of course, recommending leveraging advanced technologies. We talk about that a lot, so I'm not going to dive into that. Engaging with regulatory bodies. There's a lot of publications, a lot of events where you can participate in industry advocacy and build relationships with policymakers to help shape future regulations, developing cross-functional compliance team and compliance workflows, form a regulatory assessment and response team, or even just have like an exercise if your team is smaller to enhance that coordination, interpret rules, invest in employee training, of course, implement robust data management practices. This is really important, making sure that your data is super secure and safe, using protocols like encryption and timely breach notification. Adopt a proactive risk management approach, great tip, and then engage in horizon scanning. So it's recommending to employ AI-powered systems and expert analysis to monitor and anticipate regulatory changes. That's a really interesting suggestion. Dustin, what are your thoughts about this response?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. I would highlight the regulatory monitoring system is really critical. Fintechs or credit unions or banks should really be dialed in to track the legislative developments. If they're overseen by the FDIC or whoever that, CFPB, whoever it might be, it really should be getting those newsletters, getting communication from them. Another thing they can do is just be tapped in with associations. Me and Daragh are members of various associations. Those are really, really important at kind of distilling down what is being talked about from regulators or in the industry itself. So just having that communication open to those areas is really, really important, I think. And then just making sure you're investing in compliance training, right? The best way to stay on top of compliance or regulatory changes is to make sure that your training is updated on a regular basis and that team members are aware of these changes.
Yeah, much like what Dustin said in terms of utilizing kind of newsletters and as much up-to-date news as possible is always a good thing. It is very hard to keep up to date with all potential regulatory changes that might affect you or your business or your team. So getting summaries where it needs to be, but always being ahead of the curve in terms of not being surprised by them when they do come down the pipeline is always a good thing, obviously. So it's important to stay ahead of it if possible. The training one again stands out again to both of us, I think. This is one we've touched on throughout this conversation today, but it is really so important. And one thing that isn't mentioned here, I suppose, is change in the US presidency, obviously, goes with potential massive changes to certain regulatory bodies and how they choose to operate. So that's one thing that we don't really know realistically what changes could come into effect, but it's very much a possibility that something quite big or just quite minor will come into effect. But it's one to keep an eye on in terms of anything that might come down the pipeline from that alone, because as we know, that does tend to go with changes to the tide in terms of presidencies and governments and over regulation from the very top.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the change in administration, it's just important to keep a finger on the pulse of how that'll impact and what regulatory changes. I also think it's interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen ChatGPT do this. It finalized its recommendations by actually pointing out some articles that highlight recent developments and regulatory changes for business. So very interesting to see ChatGPT adding additional context to, in addition to the sources that it's citing for the information. Okay, last question. I always like to ask weird, silly questions to ChatGPT just to see how it responds. So I'm going to ask it, how do you feel about the holidays and a new year? Oh, okay. So in the past, when I've asked ChatGPT how it feels, it'll usually start by saying, as an AI, I don't have feelings. But this time it's saying the holidays and a new year feel like a unique blend of reflection and anticipation. So it's like this high level response, not really talking about its feelings. It's just like, it's a time to pause, celebrate accomplishments, and express gratitude for the connections and opportunities we shared. I mean, it sounds like a very ChatGPT response. That's what I'll say. Talks about how it's an opportunity for businesses to align teams, et cetera. And then it ends by asking me how I feel about this time of year. I'm not going to tell you because I don't want you collecting that much data. Okay. Any final thoughts on our session with ChatGPT before we move on to the next section of our show today?
I find it interesting that it tried to spark a conversation back with you just now on asking you back the very same question. But besides that, it's lived up to what I expected.
Awesome. Okay. Well, as we're looking forward toward the new year, we can dive in a little bit more about some thoughts on the regulatory landscape. Of course, it's impossible to predict what could happen, but Dustin, in your role and even just like in your own world, when you're looking ahead to 2025, what are you thinking about, or what regulatory changes are you anticipating, or even how are you and your team preparing for changes that could occur?
Yeah, I think there's a couple on the radar with the CFPB that are of noteworthy conversation. I think the first one is around the sale of private information. So there's some discussions around data brokers and making sure that that information wouldn't be able to be sold to malicious actors or foreign entities or bodies of that might be adversaries to the U.S. Those are definitely things that are out there that are being discussed. Again, just these rules around selling information. I think Europe has been way ahead of us as it relates to this type of data sharing and information. So I think, protecting consumers is really, really important. And I will be tracking this one to see what comes of it. The other one is around their final rule around, these digital payment providers. In the past, maybe small players in the whole scheme of things, but Apple Pay and Google Wallet and PayPal and Cash App have all became just these ginormous entities with millions of transactions flowing through them. So treating them more like their bank colleagues is something that we'll probably see more of. I think even with a presidential change, I think there's still going to be some need for oversight just because of just how large they're getting and making sure that there's some oversight there. So looking forward to see what happens.
Yeah, and we'll include links to more information about both of those in the show notes. Really interesting on just data privacy protection. I'm in California, so we've had CCPA for a while, but definitely agreed it should be a little more nationwide. Daragh, what are you thinking about in your role? How do we at Inscribe help customers navigate the intersection of compliance and fraud detection? And what else comes to mind for you when you're thinking about this topic?
Yeah, I suppose being an AI vendor specifically, I think we do have a pretty important role to play in helping our customers stay compliant and remain compliant. Our job is to adhere to the highest levels of data security to make sure that we're prioritizing transparency and explainability. So in terms of all the regulations around data retention and everything like that, it is very important to stay on top of it and make sure you adhere to it to the T. So it makes sure we ensure we use the most diverse set of training data to prevent bias and to continually evaluate the performance of our AI systems as well. So yeah, that really stands out to me in terms of how we navigate the cross section between compliance and fraud prevention.
Yep. Makes total sense. We are a very security forward company. We care very, very much about protecting our customers and our customers' data. Given that the regulatory landscape is always changing, we know that proactive planning and collaboration between compliance and fraud teams can make all the difference. Now is the time to think about long-term fraud prevention strategies that sort of balance that operational efficiency with really strong compliance. Dustin, when you're thinking about preparing for 2025, what's one area you think businesses should focus on if you could just whittle it down to a single source?
Yeah, if I would whittle it down, it's just making and investing the time in machine learning, right? Like being able to reduce friction while identifying unusual patterns or fraud in general is really, really important. Consumers are very finicky by nature. They're getting more and more so. So being able to onboard in a expedited manner, being able to have their transactions go through without being stopped, all those types of things are really important to consumers. So being able to just dial down really good with the behavior of our consumers, how they do things, what's their typical patterns, and being able to just call out the right anomalies is really important. So I would say just focusing on that is a critical piece of 2025.
I love that. I think that's great advice. And when we talk about consumers, like we are also all the consumers as well. So yeah, we are finicky because there's so many offerings out there. And it's like we've talked about, I'm busy. I want something that's fast and efficient. And if one vendor or bank or lender can't provide it, it's easy to hop over to another. Daragh, what advice would you give? Again, try to whittle it down to fraud teams planning for the year ahead.
Yeah, Dustin touched on some good suggestions there for sure. A bit like we possibly mentioned earlier in the call is just leveraging industry collaboration as well. So sharing data where possible and where legal is always a good thing in relation strictly to fraud prevention. And again, what like Dustin touched on, adapting to advanced technologies and using AI where possible could be a huge potential game changer for fraud teams. And if you are considering working with any type of vendor in that space, it doesn't have to be just strictly AI, but it's important to ask them if they're already ISO 27001 certified. I think for reference as well, when we touch on data security, this is a pretty wide-known global benchmark. So it specifies best practice for managing information security, which includes obviously risk assessments, mitigations, and continuous monitoring, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to ensure that is the case when it comes to data security. If they are an AI vendor as well, you could ask them if they're ISO 42001 certified or if they're planning to be. So that should give you a really good indication as to whether you're working with a responsible and compliant AI vendor.
Yeah, great tips all around. 2025 is, of course, an opportunity to fine tune our strategies and ensure we're not just reacting fraud, but, doing our best, however possible, to stay ahead of it. All right. It's time for our lightning round. Let's end with one tip for fraud prevention during the holiday season, or your favorite holiday movie, or both. Dustin, we'll start with you.
I'm definitely going to do both. But my number one tip for fraud prevention during this holiday season is really to stay vigilant, right? To adopt this, what I call the trust but verify approach, whether it's verifying unusual transactions or scrutinizing unfamiliar senders or double checking the legitimacy of some type of offer or unsolicited call, taking a moment to confirm things, just being more vigilant, I think can save a lot of money and heartache over the holiday season.
Absolutely.
Man, holiday movies. I don't know. I like classics. What's a Wonderful Life? I like kind of childhood memories. Home Alone. I also like my kids' experiences with things like the Polar Express. So those are all. I mean, there's so many great ones. How to choose is really hard.
It is hard. Daragh, your turn.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet in terms of number one recommendation. Again, a bit like what Dustin said, is just stay alert. If something seems suspicious, it's quite possibly is suspicious. So always take a second look. Never rush to judgment in terms of making a decision when it comes to this kind of thing. In terms of holiday movie, again, it is so hard to narrow it down. I'm a very big fan of Elf. Will Ferrell at his very best. So that's always a classic. I'm
love that.
most certainly going to turn one of the movies on this weekend as we're getting close to the day itself.
Great answers from you both all around. Yeah, similarly, of course, stay vigilant, trust but verify, especially if something like really pulls on your heartstrings. Like if it feels really emotional or really urgent or too good to be true, just like pause, take a breath and give it a second look. Agreed. It's like impossible to choose a favorite holiday movie. And I'm going to cheat and say two. First one, Die Hard. It is a holiday movie. I will die on this hill. And then second one, Home Alone 2. It's such a goofy movie. And Kevin's character technically commits credit card fraud because the hotel staff doesn't even ask for identity verification when he checks in with his dad's credit card. To be clear, fraud is not funny, but a good holiday movie is. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on this special holiday themed episode of Good Question. We hope these insights help you navigate the fraud season and prepare for the challenges and opportunities of 2025. Happy holidays, and we will see you next year. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready to kick it off. Actually, I'm going to take a sip of my coffee first. I want my water.
Try to remember my name between now and then.
I know it's tough. Okay.
Hi, I'm Daragh McMeel.
Dustin, this is where you can bring in your name.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll go, I'm Daragh. No, it's honestly, this is the hardest part of the whole podcast. For some reason, we always struggle with this. Okay, so how did we feel about ChatGPT's response? Was it thorough, helpful?
Pretty general, but I think it touches a lot of the most frequent ones that you do come across.
Okay, I might edit that question out. Okay, so